I'm going to argue that this is part of, we're not really going to talk about hunger today, at least not my piece. I think the network piece is about building human connection, and I'm going to say that that, to me, is part of feeding our soul and feeding our mind. So I'm going to move it to the other end of the spectrum. And so what do I mean by connection? Right now, most of us in this room have a device in our pockets that can connect us instantaneously to almost every other person in this room who has that same device, right? Our phone. And we can also get connected to almost anyone around the world with this device. So technology has made it that we can get very connected very quickly to millions of people and information around the world. And yet, we still struggle to get connected. We have this paradox. So, and my evidence for that is the plethora of online dating, right? So we have eHarmony, Match.com, JDate, Christian Mingle, and my new favorite, Plenty of Fish. So I haven't seen ads, but somebody I know said they were using Plenty of Fish. So there's all these online dating websites, and what they're telling me is that even though we can easily get connected to one another, we still really need help, right? So here's a story from my own personal experience that exemplifies this need for help in terms of getting connected, right? So a couple weeks ago, my husband and I flew down to Atlanta to go to an old friend's wedding. So my friend's name is Mahesh. We went to college with him, and it just so happened that my husband and I and Mahesh and some of his friends went on a trip to Costa Rica about 12 years ago now. So this guy Keith, who we went on this trip with, was at the wedding. We hadn't seen him in 12 years. And we went up and said, hey Keith, how you doing? Nice to see you. And we had also gone on the same trip with some of his friends. So Mahesh is our friend, Keith is his friend, and then their two friends, Matt and Dave. So people we have not kept in touch with, we have not seen in these 12 years. So we're talking to Keith and we say, how's Matt and Dave? How are they doing? What are they up to? It's been 12 years, it's been a long time. And he said, it's really funny you mention it because where they are now, it has everything to do with that trip to Costa Rica and also with our friend Mahesh. And we're like, really? Tell us more. So it turns out that while we were on this trip, and Costa Rica has these really amazing hot springs. So basically sort of natural kind of hot tubs built into the environment. You go to these different facilities, you pay money, you get to soak in these amazing tubs. And it's really nice, I highly recommend it. And so this one night, we're all out going to this place, one of these hot spring hot tubs. And I don't remember any of the rest of what happened, so it must have been long after my husband and I had left. But so Mahesh and Keith and Matt and Dave, these four guys, are all sitting in this one tub in this hot springs. And they look over, and in this neighboring tub, there's a group of young women. And people are making eyes at each other. And finally, Mahesh gets up and walks over and talks to the women. And soon enough, they come over with him, people start mingling, and they all really hit it off. And they learned that a lot of them are living in New York at the time. They have some things in common. They get to know each other. And even though we're on one trip, one vacation, in our little group of friends, and we're traveling through Costa Rica with our own itinerary, and these girls are doing the same thing, amazingly, at least 2 more times, our two groups intersect and cross paths. And every time, there seems to be a connection between this one woman, Mary Beth, and Dave. So, okay, that's kind of interesting. But at some point, Dave leaves the trip early, and he goes home to New York, and it's just Matt left, and Mary Beth meets Matt again, and this time the two of them really hit it off. In fact, they hit it off so much that they both go back home to New York, and now 12 years later, they are married and have 2 children. And this is all what we learned at this wedding in Atlanta a couple weeks ago. So, as you can imagine, Dave was not so thrilled with this. His best friend, went off with this woman, and now, he got left out of the lurch. But it turns out that Mary Beth, at some then future point, introduces Dave to one of her friends, and now they're married and they have 1 child. So think about this. All of this happened, 2 marriages, 3 children, all because Mahesh got up and went over and talked with those women, right? So it all comes back to him in making that connection when you think about it. And so in some very bizarre way, this is what I do for a living. I obviously am not a matchmaker. I'm not connecting people who are looking for dates. And sadly, my day job is not in hot springs in Costa Rica. But what I'm doing is connecting people and organizations to one another who want to work together and who want to accomplish something together. And so FEN, this Philadelphia Higher Education Network, supports and promotes campus community partnership. And so that's kind of our generic umbrella term for anything that involves students, faculty, community, anyone on the campus going out into the community and doing some kind of project, doing some kind of engaging in partnership, doing something for social change. So often we work with community service directors, service learning coordinators, faculty, someone who has this resource, whether it's intellectual, human capital, the energy to do something, and they want to work off campus in the community with nonprofits, many of the organizations you're hearing about today. And while people can find each other all the time, they often need help. They often need that human connector that brings people together. So you might say, well, why is this really all that important? I mean, we have Google, right? Like, if you want to know anything, if you want to know who to work with, just Google them, right? So if you want to do a project in a food cupboard in North Philadelphia, you can use Google and it will give you a list of organizations. But if you want to know which organization has a really good volunteer manager, or which organization has worked with college students before, or which organization is actually trying to do some really new project right now and really needs your particular help, that's the kind of thing that you need a human for. I mean, I'm going to argue, a human connector, someone who really understands what you're trying to do, who really understands the organizational landscape, and who knows what those little nuances are that make for a good relationship and for a good partnership. So often, as I said, I'm unfortunately not spending my days in hot springs most of the time. I'm more finding myself in rooms like this or in conference venues. So a room in Center City is kind of more my usual scene. But I'm often, I'm sitting at one table. That's my little hot tub, hot spring. And I'm sitting at this one table, meeting with people. And across the room, there's this other table of people. And I see a connection. Oftentimes, at this point now in my career, 15 years on, it's often that I know someone at that other table too, so it's not a totally anonymous, kind of approach. But, I see someone and I realize, person A should meet person B. Why? I don't know, it just depends. Sometimes it's because they do similar work. Sometimes it's because they're doing work, working in similar neighborhoods and they may not know each other. Sometimes it's because I know they might be asking similar kinds of questions. But I make it a point to introduce person A to person B and to hope that something really good comes from that. So we have now started talking in my organization about what this looks like. And so we're now starting to describe FEND, not just as a network, but as a web. And I don't mean the World Wide Web. I mean an actual web, like a spider web. And so basically, we visualize FEND as this sort of big, complex, interconnected web, lots of strings and threads that are bringing people together, different types of institutions, different types of roles, in different parts of the region, so different sub-geographies, and around different issues. So some people in the web are really interested in education, some people in healthcare, anti-poverty work, you name it, working in different slices of the pie, different parts of the web. And I'm, I guess as the director, I'm sort of the chief spider, right? So I'm the one helping to, spin the thread and connect people and, in some ways trap people into my web, hopefully not like the way a spider does. I'm not trying to kill people. I'm just trying to bring them in and learn something about them, learn what makes them tick, and figure out where they fit in this web. And even though we do rely on technology, I mean, by no means am I against technology. We have, I think a sophisticated database that we use. We definitely rely on technology, but a lot of it is still, in our heads. A lot of it is in my head about who is doing what where, for what purpose, with whom. And so we joke that we are spider brains, which is basically kind of our funny term for being a human connector. So we're this little brain, we're this knowledge base of who's doing what where, but we're spiders. So it's little brains with spider legs that kind of flit around the network and make connections, weave people, and bring people together. So we have now subwebs in our network, so different pieces of people working on specific issues. And we're now at the point where we've evolved to where we're basically trying to create the situations where those connections can happen more readily. And so what I mean by that is that we are now hosting events and convening gatherings, just like this kind of a thing, where the likelihood of that chance encounter is more frequent. And so what I'm now calling this is this funny term, planned serendipity. So this is, think about that, it's a new oxymoron, right? So serendipity being this sort of chance encounter, and planned, not that I know that something's going to happen, but I know that if I create this venue where lots of people are going to come together who are really looking for that connection, that there's just a higher likelihood that that connection is going to happen. And so, the example, of course, in the dating scene is people going to a singles bar, right? Everyone there is looking for a connection. And so you're way more likely to meet someone going out to that kind of a place than you are sitting at home watching TV by yourself, right? So we're trying to create the sort of campus community partnership, version of a singles bar. And yes, food matters. Unfortunately, we can't get away with real drinks at our events, but food always helps kind of grease the wheels and get people talking. But we host meetings, convenings, events, different kinds of venues, where the idea is that by bringing people together, they're going to have a much greater likelihood of forming that connection. And so the other way we do this is we make sure that we really build in a lot of introductions and announcements and, essentially taking the networking piece and building it into the agenda. So a lot of people will talk about how the best part of any kind of conference or meeting is the time before and the time after. So the content itself is less exciting than the mingling that you do with people, at the food table, at the water cooler, so to speak, before the actual event happens. And so what we try to do is we build that into the agenda. We make sure that we go around the room and do introductions, that we let people do announcements, that we really give people the opportunity to sort of talk about who they are and what they're trying to accomplish, so that someone across the room might say, I need to meet that person. So one example that I'll tell, one story, a couple years ago we had our fall kickoff meeting. So every year we do a spring conference, we do a fall kickoff meeting. It's usually like a half-day thing. This year we did it, this year in particular, we did it at Rutgers Camden. So we're also moving things around. We have our events in different places so that different parts of the web can kind of come together. We have some people who come to everything that we do. They're sort of our core constituents. But then there's other folks who come only because the topic is really relevant to them or the location is really convenient. And so this event we did at Rutgers Camden. And so we actually focused on South Jersey as a theme, and we were talking and promoting partnerships in and around New Jersey. And so we're doing this introduction piece. This guy stands up, and he introduces himself. He says, "Hi, my name is Michael Zier, and I'm the director." I don't think he's the director. He's got some role at this organization called the Center for Environmental Transformation in Camden, New Jersey. And there was just something about the way he talked about his work that just kind of grabbed me and seemed really interesting. And he must have had a similar kind of feeling about us, because a couple weeks after this event, he contacts our office and essentially just wants to, do a meet and greet, wants to know more about Fend, and, he wants us to know more about him. And, I said yes. And so I basically jumped in the car, drove back across the river, and went to meet him at his facility. And I think, in my experience, not everyone would do that. Not everyone would take the time out of their day to go meet with an organization that doesn't necessarily have a ready, wasn't really clear from the outset, what am I actually going to do with this guy? He's not a university. I don't know, none of my universities are partnering with him that I know of. He's got this interesting nonprofit, but it's in Camden. And even though we're regional, we're kind of really more Philadelphia-based, but I took the time, and I'm really glad that I did, because I learned about this amazing organization that is part youth development, part environmental justice. They're growing gardens, they're transforming the community, they have a retreat center, so it's partly residential. Organizations can go and spend time there. And it's a really amazing facility that if I hadn't gone to kind of like see it, touch it, smell it, I just would not have really understood. And while yes, they had a website and I could learn all about it online, it still wouldn't have really clicked for me in the way that it did when I went and visited. So what has then happened from this one visit is, a few different connections. So first, we have one of our own programs that benefited directly by using that retreat facility, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the other thing was I started making connections. So I get this phone call, a few months later from the service learning coordinator at Princeton University, and she's looking for places that her students can do an alternate spring break in Philadelphia. So alternate spring break, when college students, instead of going and sunning themselves on the beaches of Florida or sitting in hot tubs in Costa Rica, they decide to build houses and do community service and do really nice things on their spring break. They volunteer. And so a group of Princeton students wanted to come to Philly. They needed ideas and venues. And because usually there's a residential component, they need space to live for that week. And I had just been to this, place in Camden. I said, you really should check out this organization, this CFET, Center for Environmental Transformation. They have this facility, they do all this great work, and it's not Philly, but it's Camden, it's right across the river. And it turned out that worked, that they now have this ongoing relationship. They're going back there again in the fall for a fall break. And so here I am, this Philadelphia-based organization helping a university in New Jersey that's not even in our network because it's geographically too far out, and connect to another organization in New Jersey because we could see the connection. And then a few months later, so actually this past February, so just about 7 to 8 weeks ago, we got a call from George Mason University in Virginia. How they found out about us, I don't know, but they called us because they too were planning an alternate spring break to Philadelphia. They had been planning it for months. The partner that they were gonna work with, only a few weeks later in early March somehow fell through. Whatever they were gonna do wasn't gonna happen anymore, and they needed a backup. They needed a new idea, a new place to go, including a residential facility, and of course you can imagine who I recommended, right? The Center for Environmental Transformation. So this one meeting where we got to meet led to a conversation and led to 2 different really nice connections that have now established ongoing relationships between campuses and a community partner. So, so that's kind of what we do. We go out there, we meet and mingle with as many people as we possibly can, learn about interesting things, and hopefully connect the dots. And so not only are we creating the venue for this to happen by hosting events, occasionally we also fund first dates, if you will. We, unfortunately, now is not one of those times, but we have had in our past the ability to get some large grants that enable us to essentially create mini grants and give people the opportunity to start a partnership to get going. So instead of just saying, hey, you should connect with this person, it's like, here's some money to go out on your first date. Here's some money for that dinner and a movie to get things going and see where it really takes you. And then now we're also getting to the part where we're trying to train others to be spider brains too, because we just think the world is a better place when everyone's connected. And so we have worked for many years with public schools in Philadelphia, in addition to colleges and universities, because many colleges want to work with public schools. And what we kept hearing from our college partners was that it was so difficult to work in the schools because every time I call, every time I try to go out on that date, no one returns my phone call. They just don't have the capacity. The public schools don't have the time and energy to figure out, they need that help. They need that help so desperately, and yet they can't make it happen. And so what do? We got a new AmeriCorps Vista program, so we have full-time year of service volunteers that are placed in schools, and we're training them to basically be the little spider brains for their school, for their little community, to get to know who's doing what where in this building. How do they connect to each other? How do they connect back to the school? How do they connect out into the neighborhood, to parent groups, et cetera? They're creating the spaces for that planned serendipity. They're holding monthly meetings so that they can talk to one another. And already, and this is only this year that we've been doing this, in like the first 7 months, we've had stories already where, you know, at a random school, there's 2 different college access partners in the building. One wants to hold a career fair for 9th graders on Monday. The other one wants to hold a career fair for 10th graders on Tuesday. You know, in the old world, they would have each done their own thing. Well, because we have our person there, kind of bringing them together, realizing that this is going on, seeing an opportunity for connection, now, lo and behold, they can actually work together, plan a larger career fair, and invite the whole school. And so that kind of thing is happening. And I guess the final piece of what we're doing is we're trying to measure this, right? Because you know, we live in a world where if you can't measure it, you can't really claim credit, and you certainly can't get funding for it. And you know, as you can imagine, this kind of relationship building and connection is really fuzzy and amorphous, and it's really hard to claim credit. And to even know that you were the one that played that role, right? Because a lot of other things have to happen. It's not just that initial connection, and we recognize that. But we have discovered this thing called the partner tool, and that's a whole nother long acronym, and I can't remember what exactly it is. But it basically allows people in a network to kind of map and basically give feedback on all the other partners in the network. And you feed it all into a computer, and it tells you sort of who's related to whom, who's working with whom, who's the center of who's a node, who's kind of connected to lots of different people, how strong are those relationships, you know, what's really going on behind the scenes. And so our hope is that over time, we can kind of document like all these relationships, where they're going, are they getting stronger, are there more threads in the web or fewer? And so that's kind of, you know, what we're doing. And I guess I'll conclude by just saying that I think that somehow this is sort of feeding, I don't know if it's a spiritual thing or just a psychological thing, so I guess that's the soul piece. Our need to be connected, our need to do this work in collaboration, to be more effective at what we're doing, and in our experience, you're only more effective when you're working with others. Doing things in a vacuum just does not get you very far. When you're trying to change massive social problems, I mean, you're not gonna solve hunger by yourself. It's just not gonna happen. You need to work with others who are looking at it from different parts of, you know, the equation. And so we try to make those connections. And so it's sort of feeding the soul, and hopefully then also that leads into feeding the mind, so that we can take on these questions that are big, deep intellectual challenges, and come up with better solutions. So that's it. Thank you.